Just a little bit. Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started here in about a minute. Actually, I didn't know the song was wrapping up, so we're going to call that the time here. Welcome, everyone. Oop, I got ahead of myself. Welcome to Building Bridges for America, our virtual book club. We appreciate you sharing where you're joining us from in the chat. And if you haven't been able to, you can use that participants tab. Then click on your name and edit it to include your preferred pronouns if you so choose. Just a quick insight into who Building Bridges for America is. We are a grassroots organization that is about mobilizing and empowering relational grassroots organizers from across the country who want to support campaigns and causes based in progressive values. And you can see on the screen our values that guide everything that we do. And everything that we do has value, and it doesn't matter the result. We're committed to a broad and inclusive coalition, and then we are a Pete Buttigieg inspired organization. But anyone who, no matter who you supported in the last election, is welcome. We just use his 2020 campaign rules of the road, and you can see those listed at the bottom of the screen. And why do we exist? Because ultimately, we want to see a just and equitable democracy where everyone is valued and belongs. So that is who we are. We're so thankful for you joining us tonight. And part of what guides us this year specifically is our lenses. So in every programming event that we do, we want to look at these four lenses, and we want them to guide our conversations and guide the candidates we choose to support. So bridging rural and urban communities, engaging in that fight for racial equity, fighting for causes and candidates who are all about democratic reform, and then creating a political environment where everyone belongs. And that's what we use, and we'll use that tonight as well. So again, welcome. And here are just a little bit of the past. We've read 5 amazing books from 5 very different authors. So if you have the chance, make sure you order those from your local bookstore and take a look at those. And just to ensure that everyone has an enjoyable experience tonight, we ask that you please keep your mic muted. And if you would like to contribute to the discussion, please use that raise hand feature or the chat. And just make sure you use it responsibly so we can hear from a multitude of voices tonight. This event is being recorded, so if you would like to, feel free to turn your camera off and even rename yourself if you so choose. And then we just ask that everyone adheres to the values of respect, belonging, and joy tonight. And if you are new to Zoom or need a reminder, at the bottom of your screen, you should see that reactions button. Click on that, and then you should see that raise hand feature. And it's pretty much the same thing on a phone. You're just going to hit the ellipsis button, the three dots, click on that, and then you should see that raise hand feature pop up for you. So that is what I needed to share with you all tonight. And we are so excited tonight to have Desmond Meade, the president of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, FRRC, with us tonight. And thank you so much, Desmond, for agreeing to be with us and share your experiences and wisdom with us. But just a quick few things about Desmond is Desmond, I got to get my sheet here. So Desmond Meade is a citizen of Florida who overcame many obstacles to eventually become president of FRRC, chair of Floridians for a Fair Democracy, a graduate of Florida International University College of Law, and a Ford Global Fellow. Desmond was recognized by Time magazine in 2019 as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. And if you haven't read that article, it was authored by Stacey Abrams herself. And Desmond was honored for his work in empowering and engaging local communities across the state of Florida through the work of Amendment 4 that would restore the right to vote for men. I don't have the exact numbers, but hundreds of thousands of Floridians. And so we've been talking about Stacey's book, which is all about ensuring that right to power through the ballot box. And so we are pleased, Desmond, that you are joining us here tonight. Thank you so much. And we'll get you unmuted if you're not.
Well, thank you, Wes, so much for having me. Just one correction. Listen, it was do not shortchange us, Wes. Not this amazing grassroots effort. It was not hundreds of thousands. It was 1.4 million returning citizens in Florida that benefited from the passage of Amendment 4. And I am indeed happy to be here. I see the smiling faces in the little what they call it, the video windows. I see you even have a twin from Washington, Wes, right? It looks just like you too. But all of these smiling faces have encouraged me, and I'm listening. I'm ready to get in it. Listen, you guys had me from the introductory music, Respect from Aretha Franklin, and I hope you remind me to talk about why that song struck a chord with me today.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And, as I shared in the introduction, you were recognized in Time for your work specifically in Florida through FRRC with Amendment 4. And so, you know, I'm sure you're going to tell you may share part of your story there, but what ultimately made you want to start that journey to see Amendment 4 pass in Florida? What brought you to that place? And can you speak to some of the challenges and joy that you experienced as you went through that journey?
Wes, that was a loaded question, man. You know that, right?
Well,
Let
let's
me.
break it down.
Yeah.
You
I'm gonna.
start your story, share your
Yeah,
story.
I'm gonna start actually from Time Magazine. Right, interesting conversation. When I went to the gala, I happened to be sitting next to a couple executives from Time, and I was like, kind of joshing with them a little bit, and I told them, I said, listen, you guys made a huge mistake. You put The Rock on the cover of that edition of Time 100, right? And I was like, that was the wrong choice. You should have put me on the cover, right? And it wasn't because I was conceited or anything, right? Well, the reason why I was pushing that was because folks need to know that you don't need to be a movie star. You don't need to be rich. You don't need to be some type of celebrity or an athlete to make a difference in your community, to make a difference in your state, to make a difference in the country, much less the world. And if folks could see a person like me, especially from where I came from, right? If they could see that I could go from that to becoming Time 100, then anyone that read the article, anyone that is listening to me now should know that no matter what position you are in life, that you possess all the tools necessary, right, to have a significant impact on our democracy, to forever change the face of this country. And what is that journey, right? Well, I tell folks my journey started, in August of 2005, when I was standing in front of railroad tracks in South Florida, waiting on a train to come so I can jump in front of it. That day that I stood there, I was homeless. I was addicted to drugs. I was recently released from prison. I was unemployed, and I didn't see any light at the end of the tunnel, right? And I knew that, I believe that I was raised in a loving family, and my parents were Christian, and I didn't think that they raised me to be in that position that I was that day. But there I was, and I was ready to end it, but God had other plans, and for some reason the train didn't come. And I ended up crossing the tracks and walking a couple blocks further, checked myself into drug treatment. After completing drug treatment, I moved back into a homeless shelter again. And while there, I decided to do something to stop that vicious cycle of drug abuse. When you stop and your life seemed to improve, and then something happens to make you either pick up a drink or pick up a drug, and then you look around and you right back where you started from, or even worse, right? And that has happened to me many times before, and I didn't want to do it again, Wes. I mean, I felt that if I were to have relapse one more time, that maybe that time I'm not going to be as lucky, and that train is going to come. And so I enrolled in school. I figured that maybe if I get an education, I could probably, it'll probably raise my self-esteem. And that's what I did. And I ended up doing real well in school. I enrolled in paralegal studies course, ended up graduating at the top of my class. My professors encouraged me to continue my education, so I pursued a bachelor's in public safety management with a concentration in criminal justice. And I tell you, I chose that because I figured, since I had a lot of experience getting arrested, a lot of experience appearing before judges, that somehow or another that experience was going to pay off in the classroom. And you know what? It did. And I ended up graduating with highest honors. And eventually I was accepted into law school. And in May of 2014, I graduated from Florida International University College of Law with a Juris Doctorate degree. Right. And I tell folks I have a dual doctorate degree, a doctor from the streets, and of course, a doctor in law. And this is the thing. And I tell folks, man, that when I was standing at those railroad tracks, if somebody would have approached me and said, Desmond, don't do it, don't jump in front of that train. And I'm going to say, why not? Right. My life is horrible. And they're going to say, if you don't jump in front of that train, in 4 years, you're going to end up meeting the president of the United States, President Barack Obama, of course. You're going to sit on boards with mayors and commissioners and attorney generals, and you're going to eventually become the executive director of an organization that's going to, and you're going to lead the largest expansion of voting rights in so many amount of years, and you're going to eventually be named one of the 100 most influential people in the world. And if somebody would have told me that, then, I would have looked at them, and you know what I would have asked them? Where did they get those good drugs they smoking? Right? Because there was no way that you could convince me, a person that was hooked on drugs. Specifically, I was hooked on crack cocaine, right? And in that position, there was no way that you could have told me that my life would have turned around so much. And in a matter of a few short years, I would have been able to accomplish the things that I've accomplished, right? And that goes to speak to why I should have been on that cover of Time. Because people need to know, man, listen, if that homeless crackhead who's getting ready to kill himself, if he could turn his life around and have an impact on our democracy and have an impact on this world, then what can I do? What can each and every one of you all on this call right now, what can you do if I can do that, right? And so that tells us that we don't have to limit ourselves. We don't have to be scared to dare to dream, all right, to live in a democracy, right, that is ideal, right? That we don't have to cut corners, that we don't have to, well, we're not going to get that, so don't try for that. Or, we're not going to live in a world like that, so don't try. No, you could dare to dream your wildest dreams, and you, each and every one of you all actually have that power to do it. And so that, that was my story that led me to a point, because you remember you and Jenny, I seen y'all clapping, right? When I said I graduated law school, right? But because I lived in Florida, that didn't mean too much, because guess what? I can't even practice law until my civil rights have been restored, right? I can't live anywhere I want to live because HOAs prevent people whose rights have not been restored from owning or even renting a home, right? And then, of course, the biggest thing of them all was I couldn't vote, right? Even in 2016, when my wife ran for office, and I was all excited about her campaign and worked on it, and we was getting close to election day, and somebody, tapped me and said, Desmond, I know you're excited. You can't wait to vote for your wife. And then it was like they took a knife and just stuck it in my heart and just twisted it to remind me, right? Because Florida has some antiquated Jim Crow felon disenfranchisement laws that, no matter what I was able to overcome, no matter the fact that I had dedicated my life to giving back to my community and serving my community, because I lived in the state of Florida, right? I was not good enough to even cast a ballot, right? And what I knew even before then, it wasn't just me. I'm not the exception. There are so many folks out there that I personally ran across who could not vote. At one point, I think at its height, it was over 1.68 million people. And if you're from some of these states, don't have that many people, right? Because 1.68 is larger than the population of over 10 U.S. states and territories and over 40 or 50 countries in the world. And so that was a sizable amount of people, which accounted for about a quarter of the total amount of people in this country that couldn't vote. And so when I hear the stories of the veteran who put his life and put his body on the line, right, to defend democracy, and he's out there and he comes back home with PTSD, right, and end up having, because the VA, he's not getting the services that he needs as a veteran, he self-medicates with drugs, and now all of a sudden he gets arrested for drugs, and now he lost his rights for the rest of his life. Or the other veteran who couldn't make ends meet and wrote a check for food, and the check bounced, right? And because of that, he lost his right to vote for the rest of his life. And so hearing all kinds of stories like that, we knew that, I knew that something had to change, especially when you seen at one point in Florida when we had Governor Charlie Crist, who was a Republican at the time, that had a policy that allowed for the automatic restoration of rights of people who were convicted of less serious crimes. And in those 4 years he was in office, over 155,000 people were able to have their civil rights restored. And then to see another politician come into office after him and just roll back those policies and make it even more difficult, so difficult that we still have people who applied in 2008 that are still waiting to have a hearing to see if they can get their rights restored. And so when I seen that 4 politicians could arbitrarily decide which American citizen get to vote and which American citizen don't get to vote, I thought there was something inherently wrong with that. No matter what party they're from, whether they're Democrat, Republican, or whatever, 4 politicians should never have that much power to decide. Matter of fact, no politician should have that much power to decide which American citizen get to vote. And so we knew that we had to somehow or another dilute some of that power out of the hands of politicians and put it in the hands of the people. Hence, the Amendment 4 campaign was born, and it was born and led by people like me who could not vote, who were directly at the heart of the issue. I hope that answered your question.
You could just keep talking, and I think we would all be okay. And what I love as you were explaining that, here at Bridges, we really believe in the power of relational organizing through the power of storytelling. And not only telling your story, but also including other stories. And that personally really spoke to me. So thank you for sharing that. And you know, as you were talking, you know, you mentioned the things that made you, you know, at each step in those lives go a step further to pursuing more and more, not only for yourself, but for others as well. Um, you know, can you just, we know that, okay, it passed and there were issues right away afterwards. And I'm not sure if everyone here tonight is aware of all that. So 1.4 million Floridians are now going to be able to vote. But then in comes your governor, who won't be named as he does not deserve it. What happened? And then what did you and FRRC do?
Well, so in order for me to tell you what happened after that, I have to tell you what happened before that, right? All right. So here we are. I came up with the idea that, you know what, we need to get this power out of the hands of politicians. We need to have a ballot initiative that will restore voting rights to people with previous felony convictions. And I'm going to tell you, all of the experts looked at me and were like, "Are you nuts? That would never happen." Right. Um, I tell folks that if my mother was alive at the time, she would probably think I was crazy too. She probably would have thought that I probably found the drugs that guy probably was on that told me don't jump in front of the train, right? But the reality is that uh, 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 it's hard to walk away from something. Let me tell you, it really is when you are experiencing that pain. And we're going to get into it. Wes, you got to remind me to get into this about the different roles that we play and how important it is for us to understand where do we fit in the ham and cheese omelet. All right. You're going to remember. Matter of fact, Jenny, could you write that down? All right. Where do we fit in the ham and cheese omelet? That is going to be so crucial. But let's talk about what happened before. So here you have a very controversial subject, restoring voting rights to people with felony convictions, and you're trying to do it in a controversial state such as Florida, which is 3 or 4 states in one, depending on who you talk to, right? And you were trying to do it during a controversial time in which it was a political climate that was rife with division, hatred, and fear, right? There was all a recipe for disaster, right? Yet, on election night in November of 2018, over 5.1 million people voted yes on Amendment 4. Let me put that number in perspective. We had over 1 million more people vote for Amendment 4 than for the governor of the state of Florida, right? And we had at least 1 million people who voted for Amendment 4 also voted for our current Republican governor of Florida, right? And so we were able to show that there was a broad cross section of support for Amendment 4. And when you think about it, because people were thinking, oh, wow, if you restore voting rights to people with felony convictions, man, that's going to be a boom for Democrats, and that's going to turn Florida blue. And when you hear that narrative, you would automatically assume and reasonably expect that Republicans were going to launch a campaign against this, right? A la Willie Horton campaign to try to scare people into not voting for it. That dark money was going to pour into Florida, and Florida is one of the biggest states where dark conservative money can pour into, right? You would expect that to happen, but none of it happened, Wes. No opposition, in spite of assumed implications of Amendment 4. No major opposition was launched against Amendment 4, and we had a broad cross-section of support. Now, let me tell you my favorite part. When I looked at those 5.1 million votes, right, I didn't see votes that was based on hate. I didn't see any votes that was based on fear. What I saw with votes that was based on love, forgiveness, and redemption. And I believe that on that night, that we in Florida showed the country, showed the world that love can in fact win the day. That we can move major issues without having to attack each other and tear each other down, or to scare people to where we have neighbor hating neighbor, or scared of neighbor, scared of other neighbors, that we can bring a community together of diverse opinions, of diverse races, of diverse backgrounds, that we can organize along the lines of humanity and do something or achieve something that was beautiful. And we did that. And it's so important to understand that that's what our campaign was founded on. It was founded on love. And so once you know that it was founded on love and bringing together people from all walks of life, all political persuasions, and bringing them together along the lines of humanity to say yes to something that made sense, something that was humane, something that was just and right. Once you realize that, then you can understand the reaction to what happened, right? And what we've seen happen, and I'm not just going to throw it all on one side, but I think it's indicative of the arrogance that some politicians have, right? Because here's the analogy that I use, that politicians have been walking past a homeless family for decades, right? And they know that this family is out there in hail, sleet, and snow, right? In the heat, they're out there and they do nothing to address that need of that homeless family. But at some point, the people in the community came together and said, well, if the politicians don't have the cojones to do the right thing, if the politicians don't have the heart to place the needs of the people above their partisan rhetoric and infighting, then we the people will take matters into our own hands and engage in one of the most purest forms of democracy there is. And that is when the people come together and say, this is what we want. This is how we need to be governed. And what the people did was they came together and they built the homeless family a beautiful home, a real beautiful home. But no sooner as we finished putting the final touches on the driveway, here comes the politician walking up and wanting to demand to be in charge of how the house is furnished. And that's what we see. Because for over 150 years, this issue has been around in Florida, and no one did anything about it. But the minute the people finally took matters in their own hands, and you have politicians saying, oh, we think that we know best how to implement this, and so we're going to take over now, right? And that is exactly what happened. Now, anytime, the reason why, when you go back to when I talk about four politicians deciding who votes and who don't vote, the reason why I say even if you're Democrat, I don't even want that, right? No politician should have that much power, because when they do, you can't help but to believe that at some point, in some fashion, that partisan politics is going to play a role in the decision-making process. You can't help but to believe that, because they have clearly demonstrated that over the years. And so once again, when you had politicians wanting to insert themselves, you couldn't help but to believe that partisan leanings was going to influence how they interpreted what the people want. Now, no one knew better what the people want than the people who led the campaign, because we dealt with the people, right? But they didn't want to take our word for it. And so, here's the thing, they never went to talk to the people to find out what they wanted. They just went ahead and took it upon themselves to say what the people wanted. And what they said was, what the people wanted was that everybody have to pay all outstanding legal financial obligations before being able to enjoy the benefits of Amendment 4. What do we do? Well, my belief is, where other people see obstacles, I see opportunities, right? And, you know, we could sit back and we could cry about what people are doing to us, or we can get up and we could do something about it. As a matter of fact, one of those books talk about it, right? Don't just march. No, run for something, right? Do something about it. Do something of significance and something substantive, right? That would ensure that you don't have to march anymore, right? And so, you know, what we did was, when we had a Republican dominated legislature and a Republican governor that wanted to implement, we rolled up our sleeves and tried to minimize the damage, right? The damage was done. Lawsuits was filed. We won the lawsuit at the local level in the Northern District Court of Florida, and we lost when the state appealed, right? And that was kind of, you know, that was a telling moment again, because I believe that every government, you know, whether, you know, whoever is Democrat or Republican, whatever, every government, if you talk about that you believe in democracy and you embrace democracy, then you should be engaging in things that allow the greatest number of American citizens to be able to participate in it. And if you're doing anything to limit anyone, right, especially if you're doing it based on how you think they may vote, then you're not engaging in these principles of democracy, right? Because if you are, then you're able, like I am able, to be right now in front of this group and say that when we were fighting for Amendment 4, that we were fighting just as hard for that person that wanted to vote for Donald Trump as we were fighting for the person that wished they could have voted for President Barack Obama. It didn't matter to us how people voted. What mattered most was that American citizens had the opportunity to participate in the most telling act of citizenship, and that's being able to vote, right? And whether or not you agreed with me, whether or not you looked at like me, it didn't matter. What mattered was that you're a human being, you made a mistake, you paid your price, and you should be able to participate in our democracy. Because I believe with the cornucopia of different perspectives and ideas and approaches, that the more people we have participate in our democracy, I believe our democracy becomes more vibrant because of that. And here's the key thing that a lot of politicians don't like. The more people participate, the more accountable elected officials are to the voters, right? And so what we see sometimes is you have some folks that are great. They want the title, they want the prestige, they want the pension that comes along with it, but they don't want the responsibility of being held accountable, right? And so they may engage in various tactics to limit the participation of citizens in elections. And our effort was geared toward the opposite. So even though someone put an obstacle in front of us requiring fines and fees, we said, okay, well, you know what? Let me tell you. Here's the deal, Wes. I've had some ancestors, right? I have some ancestors that I know faced certain death, right? Just to be able to go and register to vote, right? They lived at a time with state-sanctioned violence that basically said, if you try to register to vote, we're going to hang you, burn you, we're going to kill you, we're going to maim you, we're going to burn your building down or whatever. And even in the face of those threats by the authority, right? So they basically had the state say, you better not go and try to register to vote, right? And then when some people did, and they were hung on trees and left as an example. Maybe even with a sign, see what happens when somebody tried to register? They still went and registered to vote, right? And if that wasn't courageous enough, they had to do it all over again to go vote. And so when I think of the blood that was shed on battlefields and the blood that was shed by my ancestors, right? There was no way I was going to let some legislative maneuver, right, make me like depressed and make me sit down. Because at the end of the day, guess what the beautiful thing was? that no matter what the legislative did, the one thing that we had going for us is that our amendment is enshrined in the state constitution, right? And that amendment, what it did was it destroyed a 150-year-old Jim Crow law that said that you lost your right to vote for life unless the governor, unless a politician decides to give you that right back. And you would have to grovel at the feet of a politician. What Amendment 4 did was say, no, you're an American citizen, and you don't have to beg no politician to be able to vote. Here's another pathway. And no matter what the legislature could have done, they still cannot erase the fact that an alternative pathway to be able to participate in democracy was created. And the only way that they can undo that is not by through legislation, but through a constitutional amendment. And they would have to go right back to the same 5.1 million people who voted yes on Amendment 4 and convince them that they made a mistake.
I have written a lot. And I just appreciate, I looked back at our values, and I see every one of those values that we listed. I feel it and I hear it in everything that you share. And I'm kind of like stuck. What do I say next? But what I do, because Jana shared, as we were getting ready for tonight, she shared an interview you did with 60 Minutes. And in there, I think the video is literally titled, Voting is Sacred. Yes. And before we get into, the folks are starting to put some questions in the chat that we'll try to get to here. When you say voting is sacred, talk about that. Oh, did we mute you? Ah!
You must not have wanted to hear what I had to say, huh? No, that was a joke. I actually muted myself because I needed to cough and I didn't want to cough in the mic. But yeah, what do I mean? And guess what? That ties right in to the song that you played at the beginning, right? So let me tell you, in August of last year, I voted in my first election in over 30 years, right? And in November, I voted in my very first ever presidential election. The first time in my entire life, and I'm in my 50s, the first time in my entire life that I actually voted to decide who the president of the United States will be. And let me tell you, though, my experience, especially when during the primaries, as I was walking up to the voting location, I started to believe I was walking on hallowed ground. And I thought about the blood that was shed, on American soil, that to preserve that moment, right? That I was getting ready to experience. And of course, I thought of my ancestors and, like I said, bitten by dogs, sprayed with fire hoses. I thought of the thousands of volunteers throughout Florida who just sacrificed a lot to help collect over 1 million petitions in less than a year that helped get the vote out for Amendment 4. I'm talking about people who, when we didn't have one penny, we had volunteers that were taking the sheets off of their beds, and they were going to the arts and crafts store and getting paint and painting our logo on their sheets so they can use as a tablecloth to collect petitions at a community event. And I'm thinking about the people that this one guy put together PVC pipes on a backpack and put a big old sign there, and he just intentionally crashed conventions in Florida, walking around hotel rooms with a backpack with a big old sign back there that said, vote yes on Amendment 4, sign a petition here, whatever. And I thought about all of those people, and then last but not least, I thought about the over 770,000 of the 1.4 million returning citizens who was not going to be able to have a chance to participate in that election because they had some outstanding fines and fees, and because we lived in a state that's forcing a person to choose between putting food on their table or voting, forcing a person to choose between paying their rent or mortgage or voting, right? And so I'm thinking about all that as I'm walking up to the voting location, and I'm like, man, listen, I am walking on hallowed ground. This is a moment that, needs to be revered. And I remember I walked in there and I gave him my stuff, and they gave me a ballot, and I walked in that voting booth. And as I looked at that, and I tears came to my eyes, and I started just I was like taken to another place, Wes. And I can tell you that, the act that I was engaging in was a sacred act, right? And the sacredness of it had really elevated me to a place that was above partisan politics. It was a place that was above implicit racial bias, right? And it was a place that was just so sacred and pure. And it said something so simple, but yet so powerful. It said, I am. I am. That my act of voting basically said that I am a human being. I am American citizen, that I matter. My voice counts, right? That's what it did. When I was engaging in that act, I wasn't engaging as a Democrat. I wasn't engaging as a Republican. I was engaging as a human being. As a human being that was part of a society, right? In which my voice mattered. And so it was a surreal moment for me, and I could tell you that, it was so beautiful that it made me angry again, right? Because so many hundreds of thousands of individuals did not get the opportunity to experience what I did. And it really made me understand as I was engaging, we were leading up to the presidential election. It really made me understand the excitement and zeal that we were seeing among returning citizens. Man, we had people in their 70s, right? And I think 80s who had never voted before in their life that was finally having an opportunity, and they had the gleam in their eyes. And I mean, folks were energized. It made me, let me tell you, it made me somber up a little bit, Wes. When I think about, my mind went back to this woman named Barbara. And Barbara lived in the southeast Florida, we'll almost call it Treasure Coast area. And as some of our canvassers was canvassing the community, they came across Barbara. And I think Barbara had some issues, and we had to check it out. But once we seen that, okay, she don't have outstanding fines and fees, she can register to vote. One of our canvassers went to register her to vote. And as she was registering, as she was filling out the voter registration form, she started crying. And she made my canvasser cry too. And my canvasser was like, why are you crying? And she said, for over 24 years, I've been trying to register to vote, and I had come to believe that I would never, ever vote again in my life because of my drug addiction and because I have a felony conviction. Yet here I am right now in my house filling a voter registration form out. This is so surreal. And to add to that was the fact that prior to encountering Barbara, she had an encounter with her doctor who gave her 6 months to live. And as she signed her name on the voter registration form, she looked up and she asked that canvasser to pray that God would allow her to live long enough to cast that ballot. And that, when I got the story, it hit me right here, because here I see a person that was given 6 months to live, And her dying wish was not to go to Disney World or an exotic location or to meet a celebrity or whatever. Her dying wish was to be able to feel what it felt like to be an American citizen and to be able to cast a ballot. And I understood what she was yearning for because I got to experience it. I got to experience it. And so that hit me so hard. And I was telling folks about her, and one person was like, hey, do you think she'd be willing to tell her story on camera? And I was like, well, I don't know. I'll ask. And when I reached back out, that's when I was informed that 4 days after filling out a voter registration form, she died. She died, not getting a chance to experience that beautiful feeling that I experienced. And that really tore my heart. It really did. It really did. And I know that there were so many people out there just like Barbara who are scared that they're going to die before getting to feel that they're part of this democracy. And as heartbroken as I was, it strengthened my resolve to push even harder. And during that time, we were in the midst of a campaign to raise money to help people pay fines and fees. And we end up raising over $27 million, right? And paying off fines and fees of over 44,000 individuals so they can have that opportunity. Now, would they all of them vote? No. Did all of them get registered? No. But we wanted to at least make sure that if a person wanted to participate in our democracy, that they would at least have that opportunity and would not be denied because they're too poor. Because in this country, guess what? You should never, ever have to pay to be a part of our democracy. It should be free. Access to democracy should be free and unencumbered, right? And so we continue to fight that good fight, knowing that every day there's someone that's registering to vote. Every day there's someone that's getting their voter identification card. Every day there's someone that's coming back into the fold of democracy. And so that means that, guess what, Wes? Every day it's a day to celebrate. It's a day to celebrate.
Your just your passion for humanity, and you have literally created belonging in so many lives. And I think someone put in the chat, like, I don't even know if I had breathed listening to your story and the power of all that you and so many did. So just I thank you. And because we need people like Desmond Meade and Stacey Abrams and so many other, as you said, people who don't get on the cover of Time magazine who are making a difference in their community. We need people to step up. And as you challenged us earlier, there are those people in this room right now who can do the exact same thing in their local community. And I'm just going to personally shout out to my good friend Tiffany, who I know is in the chat because I've seen her chatting. But she's going to do some big things and has done big things here in the city of Omaha. So,
let me just add this too, because I want to talk about what I forgot to mention was the tie-in to RESPECT, right? And I remember when we first got the right to vote back, and somebody was like, well, how you going to register, Desmond? You know, I think, first of all, that's my personal business. But since you are insisting, right, I wanted to make a symbolic gesture. And when I first registered to vote, I registered as an independent to make a statement saying that we've fought too hard and too long to get the right to vote back, to just give it away to anyone, right? And that whether you're Democrat or Republican, you don't just get my vote because you have a D next to your name. You don't just get my vote because you have an R next to your name. No, you need to earn my vote. There's so much intrinsic value in my vote, right? When you think about all that was done so I could have the right to vote. And so I remember even when I was with the vote and I was telling folks, matter of fact, you have to put respect on my vote. You have to put some RESPECT on my vote. But here's the other part to that. Here's the flip side. The flip side is that I myself, right, recognizing the sacrifices that was made, I myself needed to put respect on my vote, right? That we as voters have to respect the sacrifices that was made and the value of our vote, because there's so many Americans that have the right to vote but don't go and vote, right? And so that respect piece is not only for politicians that are trying to get our vote, but it's also for our neighbors, for our family, for our friends who don't go vote, right? Who find every excuse under the book not to participate in elections. And they need to be reminded that they need to put respect on this vote, because it is the most, let me tell you, when you walk into that voting booth, that is the one time that you have just as much power as Jeff Bezos, just as much power as the president of the United States. That voting booth is the ultimate equalizer, because it's one man, one woman, one vote. How dare you squander that opportunity away? How dare you disrespect the legacy, right, of the people who came before you that marched? Even like, I see women on this call, right? There was a time when women couldn't vote, right? It was a huge fight behind that. There were times when if you wasn't a landowner, if you wasn't a white man, you couldn't vote. You didn't count. And so there was a lot of struggle, a lot of suffering that went into creating this moment here today, when you as an American citizen, whether you're black, white, whether you're religious or not, whether you no matter what your sexual identity is, it doesn't matter, that you can vote and you choose not to. So that's where that RESPECT, find out what my vote means to me.
I like that. I like that. And you know, and I think I think a question we asked earlier in the past week was, you know, what ultimately makes you go and vote? And you know, and I don't think I'm going to forget your story and the stories that you shared. And it will be a challenge to me to ensure, like, I have a city election here in 1 month, and I still got my dang early ballot thing and sitting here that I haven't filled out yet. And it's like, why am I waiting? So I think it's a good challenge, and you have challenged us all, not only here on this call, but when we put that recording out on the web, it will be a great challenge for all to hear from. So I do want to get to a couple of questions. And I believe Karen kind of asked a question. And so Jana is, I think, going to be able to unmute Karen. And then Karen, go ahead and ask your question.
Karen?
Hi.
Hi, Karen.
What a pleasure to meet the man on page 63.
Oh, I'm on 63? Oh, okay.
That's awesome. My question is, actually, let me read it. Does Amendment 4 have conditions on what the person's crime may have been, regardless of what you did, whether you were a petty drug dealer versus a murderer versus an insurrectionist? Will there be conditions based on your crime?
Yes. And so you remember, that's a great question. Remember I talked about that the politicians didn't talk to the people, but we did, right? And so listen, we spent a considerable amount of time, I would say a little over 2 years, actually putting this thing together, which entailed a lot of focus groups, a lot of polling. And what we found early on was that Floridians believed in second chances, all right, from all walks of life. But every group, a distinct group of people that we had engaged in conversations, they offered up without any prompting. They offered up their exceptions. They said, yeah, I believe in that people should have the right to vote back, but I don't know about people who commit murder, people who rape women, or people who molest children, right? And we didn't ask them how they felt about that. They automatically brought that to us. So that was something that was there in their spirit. And so what we seen was when we looked at all of the data, we had the, your typical philosophical question, and pose it to you this way: you're on a ship. There's 100 people on the ship, and there's only enough lifeboats for 99 people. What do you do? What do you do? And we were faced with that. The good thing was that the people. So when we seen that we carved out people who committed murder and people who committed felony sexual offenses, we seen that the support for the restoration of voting rights skyrocketed. To a place, because remember, Florida is probably the most difficult state to pass a ballot initiative in which it requires 60% of the vote, right? In order to pass it. And even the requirements to collect petitions to even get on the ballot is so onerous. I mean, it's, there's just so much challenges there. And then, of course, knowing that Florida is 3 states or 4 states in one, it was very difficult. And so we landed on the carve outs, understanding that the people who were carved out still had a pathway through the clemency process. But, when you looked at the people who we carved out, they made up less than 2% of the entire population. And so what do we do? And I think the most important thing was for us to knock down that Jim Crow wall, right, and clear the way for 98.3% of returning citizens.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Karen. That was a great question.
Yes, thank you. And I guess I just assumed if it's an initiative, it's more than 50%, but guess not in every state. So, wow. Which even I think just shows even a commitment to the work that you and so many did to, because 60%, that's a huge threshold, especially as you said in 2018.
Yep.
A lot of fear, a lot of just a lot of bad politics going on.
And guess what, Wes? We got around 65%. How do you like that? That's nice. Right. We didn't just barely make it. We blew it out the water.
Good work. Well, Benedict put another question, question in the chat, and so we'll get Benedict unmuted. And
his last name is not Arnold, is it?
Nah.
Okay. Come on, Benedict. Where are you?
Here I am. All right. Thank you, Janet. So, hi, Desmond. It's just such an honor to hear from you, and I really appreciate you taking the time. And I've lived in Virginia and will be moving back to Virginia shortly. Another state that does not have automatic voter rights restoration for returning citizens. And so mostly it's just a battle for the governor to restore the rights manually to as many people as possible. And then even when, like, the former Governor McAuliffe tried to do too many at once, he got sued and had to kind of go back and do them individually one by one. So there's this constant battle about voter rights restoration, but the battle is always over how the governor can restore rights. The conversation, as far as I've heard it, has never been about, well, why not take it out of the hands of the governor altogether and restore the rights automatically through something like a ballot initiative. And so I'm just wondering if that was kind of what the conversation was like in Florida as well, and then how you shifted that conversation to take it away from the governor and say, why is this the conversation? Let's make the conversation about doing it as the citizens, voting as a state to restore those rights automatically.
Wow. Okay. So thank you, Benedict. First, let me be clear that not every state have the option of using a ballot initiative to change rules, right? And so, there's a handful of states that allow ballot initiatives, and then there's a lot that really don't. That decision to take it out of the hands of the governor, and we did have a situation, like I said, the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition came in existence initially as an email listserv, I believe in 2003. You had multiple organizations that were the part of it. And, our aim was to deal with the governor and his cabinet as well as the state legislature. So we had a two-pronged approach. We were going to lobby legislatures to change some things, and we were also lobbying the governor and his cabinet to amend their clemency policies. I think we're in an age where, it's hard to get certain things through a legislature, and there's so many different maneuvers that these elected officials can use. They could not even, you could have the bill. It could be the perfect bill to end all of the problem. You could have a bill to cure cancer, right? But you can have an elected official who maybe his biggest campaign donor is a pharmaceutical company, right? And that pharmaceutical company sells drugs to treat cancer. He doesn't want it, so he doesn't want the cure out there yet, right? And this bill would have led to that. And so he would get this one elected official that they pay a lot of money to not even let the bill be heard in committee. And if it's not heard in committee, it just dies. And so there are all kinds of tricks and procedures that elected officials can use to stop something that's worthy of getting to the floor, or coming for a vote. And we witnessed that, after spending tons of money and using tons of resources and human capital to get legislation or to get some politicians on board, to know that you can get 99 of them on board, but if you don't get the right one, then it's all for naught. And then convincing the governor to amend the policies. You can get a governor that does, right? You've seen it in Iowa, where you had one governor that says, okay, let's restore rights. And then the next governor comes in and says, heck no, we're not. Right. Then the next governor comes in and saying, no, let's give them just a little bit. Then the next governor say, oh, no, we're not. And so it lives on whether or not the incoming administration wants to support it. And so both of those, one is a tenuous operation that, is wrought with all kinds of traps. And then you have another one that a situation in which, it all depends. It shifts from administration to administration. And so the one thing that keeps it, I guess, steady is to get it in the Constitution. But unfortunately, not every state has or have provided the opportunity for citizens to take matters into their own hands, which is a travesty in itself, because I don't know if you guys took, Democracy 101, right? But my understanding is that all the power really belongs to each and every one of us individually. And we loan, I would say, or we acquiesce some of our power in order for us to live together collectively. But make no mistake about it, that the power should come from us. And there should always be a mechanism there that if, and you can read it in the Declaration of Independence, that if there's an issue with the people who we put in charge, then we have a mechanism to either get rid of them, or we have a mechanism to create the laws that we as a community, as a society, want to see. Unfortunately, we live in a time where you have politicians that are trying to cut off all those avenues. right? They're cutting off ballot initiative. They're cutting off who can vote and when they can vote and how they can vote, right? They're just slowly chipping away at the avenues that we should have regardless, no matter what, because the power originates from us, right? And so, unfortunately, not every, and let me tell you, Florida wasn't always 60%, right? It's funny because when the ballot initiative passed years ago, the legislators right after that said, "Oh my God, it's too easy for these people to stick their nose in affairs. So let's make it harder," right? Guess what happened when we passed Amendment 4? Best believe they put an initiative on there to make it even harder for people to actually, but that was soundly defeated. But that's what politicians do. And one of the things that I've said that COVID have exposed is that there is a distinct difference between a politician and a public servant. When politicians are involved, we become divided. There's a lot of hatred and fear, and people die. When public servants are involved, then we have an opportunity as a community to come together, and people have an opportunity to live. And I think one of the elements that I can point to that distinguishes the difference is that a public servant would answer to the cries of the people, while a politician would ignore those cries for the sake of political posturing. Or partisan posturing, I should say.
Thank you so much. And, part of our mission, says servant leadership at the start. And I think I left that out, but there is, and that's my bad, but there is a reason why we said servant leadership, because that is who we need serving in our government. So thank you for that. And as you were sharing, Desmond, there was conversation in the chat, that in Virginia, the governor did put out an order giving those who have served their time automatic enfranchisement, but obviously it will likely be challenged. Or when a new one comes in and does not like that, it'll be gone right away.
Yep.
So
and Kentucky as well.
That perspective.
Yeah. Kentucky governor did the same thing as well. And guess what? Iowa's governor, who was a conservative, also ushered in a policy that allowed people with previous felony convictions to be able to vote without having to pay their fines and fees and court costs.
Even though she just passed an order to strip early voting access. So, but that's another conversation.
Yeah, we can go some directions with that one there. I tell you that.
Right?
We definitely can.
And Stacey certainly does in her book of all those obstacles they constantly throw at individuals to not only not allow them, but also to discourage them.
But one of the things that I like to caution people on is that to not get too blinded with the partisan stuff, and I'm going to tell you why. Okay. Because and I think if your son is playing in the Pee Wee baseball league, right, and the coach also has a son that's on the team, right, and you notice that your son get to sit the bench and the coach son gets to play, and the coach son makes all kinds of mistakes, right? What you gonna say? Guy is like playing favoritism, that he's not being fair, right? And your son gets in there, and if the coach thinks he makes a mistake, he just rails in on your son. You like, don't you dare go in on my son like that when you won't even say nothing to your boy, and your boy is garbage, can't even play, right? A lick of baseball, right? We've seen those things play out. We've seen it play out, right? So here's the deal. I believe in combating voter suppression, right? But I think that we need to fight that fight fairly and evenly. Well, Desmond, what do you mean by that? Well, here's the deal. Let me tell you an experience that I had a few years ago. In Florida, you have 14 days. At one point, you had 14 days of early voting, right? And in those 14 days, you could vote anywhere in your county, right? And your vote would get counted. And then on election day, so you have the 14 days, then you have election day. On election day, you must vote in the precinct that was assigned to you, right? So you basically had, say, 15 days. 14 days, you could vote anywhere in your county. And then on the 15th day, you have to vote in your precinct, right? Now, at one point, the governor says, I want to restrict early voting. I want to cut off 2 days of early voting, right? If a Republican governor would say that he's going to cut off 2 days of early voting, the entire country will be in an uproar. There go those darn conservatives, those darn Republicans, once again trying to suppress our vote, right? And that's a good argument, right? But the argument becomes weak when we're silent on the fact that a few years ago in New York, how many days did you have to vote in New York? 1 day. You only had 1 day to vote, and you had to vote in your precinct. So no matter rain, sleet, or snow, no matter if you worked in 2 boroughs over, you had to take your time off your job and find some kind of way to get to your polling location. Now, if you were to look at both of those situations and ask me which situation is more restrictive, right, and more of a hindrance of voting, and you have to, let's weigh it out. You only get to vote 1 day, and you got to vote in your precinct no matter rain, sleet, or snow. Or instead of 14 days, you get 10 days of early voting where you can vote anywhere, and then 1 day extra that you can vote anywhere. You have to vote in your precinct. Which way is more restrictive, right? Obviously, it's in New York, but New York is what? A progressive city and a progressive state. My thing is that if we're saying that we're going to fight against voter suppression, then that means we have to go in on the Democrats just like you would go in on Republicans. And if you're only saving your rage for Republicans, then that kind of weakens your argument, and now it's kind of going to be one-sided. Mm-hmm. If you're really for democracy, then that means that guess what? What's good for the goose is good for the gander, and you have to go in, and it should have been an outrage that how in the heck any progressive city should at least have a couple of weeks of early voting. At least a couple of weeks. And if they don't, they need to be shamed into doing so. But if you're not going after them, if that coach is not disciplining his son for his mistakes, but want to only discipline yours, how are you going to feel about it?
Solid points there. Very good. We have to be consistent. And
yes,
as we show that consistency, I think that will also bring more people into the movement.
You make your argument more legitimate. Now it's not seeming like, oh, you're just saying that because you're a Democrat and you hate Republicans. No, not.
Well, I don't know if you realized, Desmond, but when at first you said, oh, we're going to do this for an hour, and he said, no, we're going to do it for 30, 45 minutes. Well, and so quietly, the book club team has decided we're just going to keep going because we're loving what you're sharing. Folks in the chat are as well. And so for everyone here tonight, just know that we were already planning to add an additional week to our conversation over Abrams' book. And so we will just push back our discussion on the specific chapters, and we'll share more with that via email. So thank you, though, for hopefully be joining us for the 2 weeks coming. And we got more special guests hopefully joining for those nights as well. So I do know we have Tracy put a question in the chat, and then I do see we got some hands raised and more questions. So we're going to try to, let's go 10 minutes and try to get as many questions in as possible. So
I'm going to shorten my answers too, Wes.
Hey,
because I look like Nancy Chapman want to ask a question too. Isn't that right, Nancy? Go ahead. I'm going to make it short.
So I can I love to talk, and my students know it, and they're good at abusing it. So Tracy, here we go. We'll get you unmuted.
So nice to meet you, Desmond. Your story about Barbara kind of wrecked me because my mother's name was Barbara. I just had a question. The payment of the fines kind of reeks of poll tax. How do you go about fighting getting that removed from the whole situation, or is that a possibility?
Well, one of the good things, remember I told you that when we knew the legislation was coming, it was a Republican-dominated legislature, and then, of course, you had a Republican governor that called for it, and they basically had a supermajority in both the House and the Senate. So, if that's what the leadership want, that's what they're going to get, right? And I don't think there was any way procedurally to stop them. But what we did was that we rolled up our sleeves, and our thing was that, I told people that when I was arrested, the police didn't ask me if I was Democrat or Republican. When I was in front of a judge, he didn't ask me if I was Democrat or Republican. And one of the things that we said was that felon disenfranchisement, while its original intention was to strip the newly freed slaves of the right to vote, like a tumor left unchecked, it spread through the entire body, that people from all walks of life are impacted. And so we took that message with us in the Capitol, and we tried our best to minimize the damage. One of the things that we were able to do was that we were able to get a provision in the legislation that allowed the courts now to actually waive those legal financial obligations so people would be able to register to vote. So that's an option that we have. And then, of course, we have the option of raising money. And I'm going to tell you, over 90,000 people in the matter of like 2 to 3 months, over 90,000 citizens actually donated to our fines and fees fund. And we were able to raise $27 million in a short period of time. And so we'll probably do some more fundraising, Matter of fact, Tracy, you could send a couple of dollars our way too, that fines and fees fund.
I'm a light touch on that kind of thing.
Yeah. Just they're just through the courts or through the fines and fees. And then, of course, we could probably do something further on down the line, because if you could do the math, we have 1.4 million people who should have benefited from Amendment 4. 700,000 of them have the outstanding fines and fees, which means that there's still around 600,000 returning citizens out there.
And there's more in prisons and jails waiting to come out.
Yeah, and then there's more prisons and jails waiting to come out. But right now we know that there's 600,000 that's not in prisons or jails who have completed their sentence and don't owe any legal financial obligation, that we can get registered to vote. And let me tell you something. In a state like Florida, let's put aside 2020, because what we've seen happen this past November is an anomaly, right? Because we haven't seen that large a margin of victory since, I think, in the 90s, right? But typically Florida is a state where elections are decided by 100,000 or less votes for the president and even for the governor, definitely for the governor. And so when you add in 600,000, you have the potential to add at least 600,000 voters that's been impacted by the criminal justice system. You have an opportunity to create a massive voting block of people, returning citizens, that can definitely impact statewide elections as well as federal elections. And through that power, actually they could use that as leverage to change some of these policies on the administrative level.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Tracy.
Thanks for your question, Tracy. And I put that donate link to FRRC in the chat, and it'll be in the follow-up as well. Next, I believe Nessa had a question, and so we'll get you unmuted, Nessa.
Hi there, Desmond. It is an absolute pleasure to meet you. I'm so proud to have voted for Amendment 4 in my first election moving to Florida.
Oh, okay. What part?
I'm in Port Richey, about 45 minutes north of Tampa, right on the coast.
Yes. All right.
So my question for you is, how do you keep going after leading our entire state into passing Amendment 4, and then Ron DeSantis slapping you in the face by not restoring your civil rights? And then also, what roadblocks has he put in front of you as of today to get your civil rights fully restored?
Well, Nessa, let me tell you, first of all, remember what I said, where other people see obstacles, I see opportunities. And so I'm taking on this like persona of like the Black Panther, right? I don't know, and you guys seen the Black Panther, right? And you notice that what happens when something hit his suit, it absorbs the energy, and eventually that energy is used to repel the enemy, right? And so that's anytime you have, you know, a governor or a government that is trying to fight against democracy, we could choose to either let that blow knock us down, or we can absorb it and build that energy up, because their time is coming real soon, right? Matter of fact, we have statewide elections next year. Who knows, right? But this is the thing, is that one good thing that came out of that is the fact that they did amend the clemency policies to eliminate the waiting period, as well as they said, you know what, if you qualify for Amendment 4, you're going to get the rest of your civil rights back, which is kind of cool. And I'm going to tell you why. Because even though I benefited from Amendment 4 and got my right to vote back, I still couldn't sit for the Florida Bar of Practice Law because my civil rights had not been restored. And I was still restricted in where I could live because, you know, I want to get a nice house for my wife and kids, but I can't until my civil rights have been restored. And so that, you know, that restoration piece is going to be very helpful. And like I said, you know, you might stop some of us, but there's so many of us, because you got to remember, United States was infatuated with incarcerating its own people, right? We lock up more people than any other country in the world, right? And per capita. And so, you know, there's just so many of us that you can't stop us all, right? You could only hope to contain us, right? You can't stop us. You can only hope to contain us. And I think that eventually we will be, matter of fact, I think we are triumphant, because so let me tell you, what would you do if I tell you that I believe over 200,000 returning citizens was able to participate in an election this year, right? And what if I tell you that, you know, over 100,000 family members who never voted before, who have never registered, but got registered because their loved ones got registered, actually voted this year, right? And let me tell you, I think, you know, on election night, we had a celebration even before the final results, because no matter how it turned out, what we celebrated was the fact that, guess what, y'all, right? We always complained about young people not participating in elections. They turned out in record numbers, right? We had a record number of first-time voters, right? And the turnout was like never seen before, and we did it in the midst of a pandemic. So when I looked around, I was like, my God, no matter how this election turned out, there is something to celebrate. Right? Because at the end of the day, remember I tell you, we want everybody to vote. And if everybody vote, even if my candidate didn't win, okay, I might be a little disappointed, but that still should not dampen the fact that we created a more inclusive democracy and more people got the way in. Right. And if my candidate vote, that means he didn't do a good enough job, or maybe I didn't do a good enough job in convincing people to vote for him. But at the end of the day, what we seen in November was record turnout across the board. Right. And we celebrated. And in spite of everything that folks tried to do. And so I'm looking forward to replicating that next year in our gubernatorial election. And that's the same year that Georgia's having theirs, you know, and listen, at the end of the day, you know, I think if we continue to engage voters and register them, and not just be transactional, but transformational and relational, right, that we would create an environment where we want to go vote, as opposed to feeling like we have to go vote.
I love that. And not transactional, but transformational. And I love that. And I believe we got time for one more question. And Hannah, your hand is raised, and so we're going to get you unmuted.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. Hi, Desmond. Thank you so much for such an amazing presentation.
Well, thank you.
My question is about a statement you made earlier about one day voting in New York and balancing the scale. And I agree, it should be fair. But I don't think that's what we're dealing with right now, because each state has the right to make their own rules. And the rule that they made in New York was fair for everybody, right? I mean, it impacted everyone exactly the same. But here in Georgia, we're facing a very different situation because they're taking a situation that made it easier for everyone to vote. And now they are attacking particular communities. You know, the community that I live in South DeKalb County, we are under attack because we're the largest area outside of Atlanta. So not only have they attacked our right to vote, they have attacked our right to become an independent city. So these things are racially motivated. So I guess I disagree with you. I don't think we can ever, but I want you to educate me. I feel this way, but I don't think we can do it fairly, because I think someone used the example of playing golf. If I have to have a handicap because you're an ace golfer. But if they don't give me that handicap and they put me on the course with you and they say I gotta get to the hole in the same amount of strokes as you, I'm never gonna win. I'm never gonna beat Tiger Woods without a 12 million handicap. So I just don't think we can be fair like that.
Yeah, so I think that piece that you're talking about right there at the end was of talking about looking at things through an equity lens, right? And so I think one of the cartoons is like there's a big fence and some people need a step to actually, they can all see over the fence. And some people need one step, some people need two steps. No, listen, I am totally in agreement with you, right? And I know some of the things that, like, for instance, happened in Florida, where they didn't want polling locations at universities, right? We have some legislation right now that, that's attacking or trying to eliminate now drop-off locations at arenas. Right, we had, I think, the Orlando Magic, we had the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Tampa Rays at their arenas, respectively. People were able to go and vote, which was a great thing, especially when you're looking at those areas where in minority communities, right? And so now you see an effort to minimize that. You also see when we talk about absentee ballots, that you could, in the past, you can get a request for absentee ballot and you're going to get it for more than one election cycle. And they're now having legislation that says, oh no, you can only get it for one cycle and you have to reapply. And so we know and we see that a lot of these restrictions, like I think of the time in Texas, it probably still is, where your gun license is good enough to allow you to vote, but your student ID was not good enough. We know this, and yes, we got to speak out against it. We got to fight against it, right? The only what I was saying, right, is in the same breath that we're fighting against these restrictions that we know are racially motivated, right? It's still we still have this cloud about, or this belief that in this country that it should be one man, one vote, right? And that everyone should have free and unencumbered access to the ballot box, right? And even if it's evenly applied, if it's a burden, if it's an obstacle, it still should be dealt with, right? So yeah, so I'm not saying that we stop talking about what's happening in Georgia and Florida and other states. No, we're supposed to yell and scream about it at the top of our lungs, but don't be completely silent for the other stuff. That's all I'm saying, right? That, across the board, let's talk about expanding democracy for everyone. Let's talk about that we have to create avenues for people who are disadvantaged, right, to have the same opportunity as people who are not disadvantaged to be able to have their voices heard. right?
So I'll
We've
meet
got
you
to.
in New York.
All right. But you know, they've changed it. They've actually, activists in New York, actually, I think they've made some changes to it. It probably could still be improved, but they did move the needle on that. You know, it just at that time, it just amazed me that it was so quietly kept, because I didn't even know it until I was visiting in New York one day, and a friend of mine was like, listen, I have to cut this short because I have to go vote. I was like, why do you wait till the last minute to vote? Right? I was like, Wes, don't wait till the last minute to vote, right? And so then he was like, no, this is the one day that we get to vote. I was like, that's it? Like, that's it? What if you get sick, right? Or what if, you know, you have to work late? You have a project that, you're not given any options. And there was just something that just did not sit right. And sometimes we give people a pass because maybe they're the same political party as us, or maybe they're the same color as us, right? But what it does is that when we give our friends a pass, and we see it at work, we call it either nepotism or what's that? It's another word for it, right? Where if you give the impression that you're giving your friend a pass, but then you're disciplining other folks, right? That's problematic, right? And it messes up the morale of that work environment. And so it's, as a leader, it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we're being straight across the board. And if we're going to get on Johnny for being late, then we've got to get on, my best friend Fred for being late as well.
Now, I thank you so much. And I agree with you. I think Tamika put it fairly when she said all skin folk ain't kin folk. And I agree with that. So I understand what you're saying. Thank you so much. I've ordered your book. I'm going to read it.
I'm glad you did.
Thank you, Desmond.
It's a great book. I encourage anybody to read it. It's a short book, easy read, but it just shares my experience, my journey. There's so much to unpack, just from those railroad tracks to joining FRRC, and then of course it chronologizes my journey in thinking about Amendment 4 all the way to the victory.
Well, thank you so much, Desmond. And Jana just put in the chat Desmond's website, where you can go and order that book from local bookstores in your community or throughout our country. I got tons of notes here, and I'm just thinking of all the graphics we can be pushing out here in the next week based on this conversation. And most importantly, though, besides sharing it with us, thank you for not only are you sharing it or marching, but you are running a race to make a difference. And
thank you.
You are not only impacting Floridians, but you are inspiring and raising up other leaders throughout our country to do more to ensure that every individual can access power and participate in our democracy. And so we appreciate you, and we so look forward to see what you will continue to do, so that one day Time Magazine will put you on that cover and that story of every person, no matter their experience and how their background, can make a difference, and everyone will know that. So thank you so much, Desmond. We really appreciate it.
Well, I really appreciate the time spent with you all. Thank you all so much. And then I think Jennifer, Teresa was talking about Election Day being a national holiday. I would encourage you, I challenge you to think of which one of our national holidays do you think we'll be able to take and replace and let the Election Day be a national holiday.
Awesome.
All right.
If you want to stick around, we do something kind of fun. Just to everyone else, we're going to cut the wrap up things. But I will share a few highlights in my follow-up email to you all, so to stay tuned to that. Remember, we will continue the conversation for 2 more weeks. But I always love to let everyone unmute themselves so we can just hear from one another. So I'm gonna give you that permission to unmute yourself. And thank you so much for joining. We hope to see you next week.
Thank you, Desmond.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Yes.
much. It was awesome.
Bye.
All right.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much.